Want help to grow your business? Download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.
Hi, welcome to Communication in Crisis. My name is Kylie Worry, author, speaker, and trainer. Today we're continuing this series about communication in crisis, and we're talking a bit more about coping when you've been traumatised by a crisis. Now, I call this part the wound of a crisis. And today we're focusing on how this wound affects the two communication styles, the playful and the perfectionist. Last episode we spoke about how it affects the powerful and the patient, and I'm sure what you noticed was that each of their responses was quite different, and I'm sure that you'll notice the same thing again today. Now, we've talked a lot about crisis and in communication, and basically what it all comes down to is the fact that poor communication adds to a crisis. Normally something has been communicated poorly that causes the crisis, and because we're stressed, because we're emotional, our communication actually goes downhill and we become even worse communicators, which just adds to the crisis. The key is knowing what your tendencies are and then knowing what to do about it so you can actually prevent that crisis from escalating even further. I shared some really interesting stats previously. Things like 32% of profit being lost to poor communication in business. Now, that probably sounds like a scary statistic, but imagine flipping that around for a moment and thinking about gaining more than 30% back because you can improve your communication. So what I want you guys to do is to be focusing on what you relate to in terms of how you communicate through a crisis, but also people in your world, in your team, in your workplace, or even in your personal relationships, and how crisis might be affecting them. Because a crisis doesn't happen in a vacuum. We all contribute to it, and we're either doing something that's helping that crisis or making it worse. When we have a crisis and we have that emotional wound, it causes us pain. Now, pain, it's not like physical pain, it's more of an emotional pain, and we feel emotions that are not very pleasant. Things like depression, sadness, anxiety, anger. Anything that gets you stuck in that rut and affects your performance can be emotional pain. Now, as humans, we are very well designed to avoid pain. Think about your response to physical pain. If you put your hand on something hot, your immediate response is to pull it away. Now, the same thing happens with our emotions. When we start to feel emotional pain, the first thing we want to do is shut down and just pretend it's not happening. Now, we can do this through distraction, we can do it through substance abuse, we can do it by just avoiding the problem altogether. The issue is that when we are in a situation where there's been a crisis and we're wounded or there's been some type of emotional pain, the crisis doesn't go away by us avoiding it. If anything, it grows. So that's where the whole word courage comes into play in terms of being a courageous communicator. We actually need to have the courage to look at the situation, realise that it's uncomfortable, that it's painful, that it doesn't feel right, but that by addressing it, we're actually going to get through the crisis more healthily and actually get to the end point in a way that means that we've grown and learnt from the crisis. We've got an unhealthy cycle of offence here, which is the normal response that as humans we can have in a crisis. There's an impact, we get hurt, our communication is affected, and we keep cycling upwards until we get to that point where we feel resentment. Now, resentment is one of those emotions that just sticks to us like glue, and we can get stuck in a very unhealthy place because of that. Now, this cycle can happen in so many ways. For example, you may have spoken up at a team meeting with a really great idea about how you could take the team's project to the next level. Perhaps you took that risk and you spoke up, and it's something that's not easy for you to do. The moment that you started to share your idea, one of the other team members actually shouted you down and just put an end to the conversation. This really hurt your feelings. You weren't sure what happened and you were feeling really hurt and really embarrassed. Now, you don't know what caused this other communicator to speak up and just put an end to your idea. But what we all do is we personalise it. And so you've taken this on board thinking, well, they obviously don't think I've got anything to offer that's of value, they don't value my opinion, and basically you start questioning every aspect of yourself. Now, if you were to stay stuck in this cycle of offence, you would probably have a feeling next time you were to speak up at a meeting of, oh, what if it happens again? What if I get shouted down again and I have that horrible, uncomfortable feeling of being offended when the person shuts me down? So that could actually stop you from speaking up. The more that you avoid this situation, the easier it is for you to just sit on your ideas and actually not speak up at all. Now, the thing is, with this cycle, it just gets worse and worse. So what we've actually got to do is be aware that this is happening and push through it, fight through it. So you might be about to speak up in a meeting and you feel nervous, you feel jittery, maybe your palms are sweating, you'll be starting to question your value and think, is this really such a good idea? But you need to push through that, because taking things personally will not help you at all. Who knows what was even happening for that other person when they shouted you down? Maybe they were just having a bad day. So the thing to realise is that once you feel that offence, don't get stuck there. That's a place that we do not want to be. We want to be in a much healthier place, and that place takes some courage. Basically, what I'm sharing around this series for you guys is a roadmap to better communication. You see, when we're in a crisis, everything gets more complicated, and we can get into survival mode just to try and get out of it. But what I want to share with you is a really simple roadmap that will help you navigate through that crisis and come out at the end stronger and wiser than you were at the beginning. The first step in this roadmap to better communication is understanding yourself. Understanding what makes you the person you are, understanding how you respond in a crisis, but also understanding what things can potentially make the crisis worse. The second stage is understanding others in a crisis. You see, we have this subconscious idea that everyone responds the way that we do. So if we, for example, get more full of action in a crisis and just want to get things done and solve that problem, and we're dealing with someone who's the complete opposite to us, who tends to hide, avoid, and procrastinate, we can load all sorts of assumptions onto their behaviour and think that they don't care, or they're inept or incompetent, when really they're just struggling with the crisis like we are. And like all of us in any situation where there's a crisis, you can either help it and move through it more quickly and more effectively, or you can actually hinder it and make the crisis so much worse. Once you understand yourself, and then you start to understand others and how they can cope in a crisis, the third thing is to communicate with intention. Now, that's all about communicating and having a goal or a plan in place. It's about knowing what will actually make the situation better versus what will make the situation worse. Now, because the communication DNA model that we'll get into in a moment has 4 different styles, you need to actually understand this firstly for yourself and then for each of the other styles, because who knows who you'll be working with or dealing with when that crisis hits. But there's one thing for sure, communicating with intention through a crisis will get you so much further to solving the crisis and coming through with wisdom and strength versus being stuck in that cycle of offence, which is ending up in resentment, which is somewhere that none of us want to be. Now, last few episodes we've talked about the initial stage, which is the impact of the crisis. Today we're talking about what happens when the trauma has affected us and we've been wounded in that crisis. We've already spoken about the powerful and the patient communicator, and today we're speaking about the effect of this trauma or wound on the playful and the perfectionist communicator. Now again, these 2 styles are completely opposite. The playful communicator is much more outgoing, and the perfectionist communicator is much more reserved. And it's really interesting to contrast these 2 responses and see how they respond in a crisis. So when we're in a crisis, emotions are flying and it can be quite a tough time. We can be dealing with things that we may have never dealt with before. We can be doubting ourselves. We can feel very lost, like we're in the middle of a storm. Now, storms bring out fear, and fear changes our behaviour. One thing that we all know is that when we're in the middle of a storm, the best thing to do is stay calm and do what we need to do to get through it. But it's funny, in relationships, we actually rarely respond that way. Normally we fire back and the crisis just grows in intensity. So you need to know, first of all, what your triggers are, what can make you worse in a crisis, and then what things you can do to deal with that. on the other side, it's also really important to know when you're dealing with someone in a crisis, what you can do to actually calm things down versus what you can do that actually is going to inflame the situation and make it so much worse. We've all felt emotional pain. It's something that we sometimes feel separated by. We can sometimes feel like we're the only one who's experiencing it, but it's actually something that we all have in common. Now, pain is uncomfortable and pain hurts, but not dealing with it actually makes the pain grow. So what I'm encouraging you guys to do is to be courageous and look at it and look at yourself in a crisis and go, what are some of the things that I can do that make things worse? And what are some of the things that I can do that actually make things better? It's a bit like the metaphor of ripping off the Band-Aid. You might have that intense feeling at first when you rip that Band-Aid off, but it's so much better to do it quickly rather than do it really slowly and make things worse. So it's about being courageous and being brave and looking at what's happening, acknowledging the emotion that you're feeling and allowing yourself to process it. Because squashing it down only adds to the crisis and only makes that emotion so much stronger. So we've talked about the DNA model in past episodes, and I just want to touch on it again today. This model is something that affects all of us because each of us has a communication style or a preference that relates to this model. So I want you to think about it. Have you related to any of the styles more than another? Are you a powerful communicator that's more of an action person, more of a doer? Or are you more playful? You like to tell stories and relate to others in that way. Maybe you're patient and you're more of a supporter. You're more of an observer. You're one of the people that sits back and lets others do all the talking and you just like to sit back and listen. Or maybe you're a perfectionist communicator where you love detail and love things to be just right. And when things aren't like that, you can feel your stress and your tension increase. The thing that's key to understand about this model is that no one style is better than another. In fact, in coming episodes, we're going to look at the strengths of each style and look at what these styles can bring to a crisis that can actually make it better and actually get us through a crisis by using their strengths. But like anything, you need to know what your strengths are. You need to understand yourself in a new way. So today we're sharing about the playful and the perfectionist communicator and how they can be affected by the wound in a crisis or how they respond to trauma. So the playful communicator, the storyteller, the chatty ones, the ones that are loud and make jokes. All of us have someone in our world that fits into this communication style. They're about 30% of the population. These guys are attracted to jobs that allow them to be around people. They are attracted to jobs like PR, marketing, sales, customer service, anything that allows them to be out front and talking. That's where they feel comfortable. They want to be noticed. These guys are the complete opposite to the perfectionist communicator who prefers to be more in the background. Now, I've given you a blueprint for these communicators and we've spoken about this before, but I just want to re-reference it again just so you're clear on who we're speaking about. The playful communicator, a famous example is Ellen DeGeneres. Now, what we observe about these guys is that they're talkative, loud, and funny. What they want is recognition. They want to be seen, noticed, heard, and liked. They want to be everyone's friend. What they need is a fun environment that's interesting and friendly. And they really need socially to really fit in and feel like they're part of the team. Now, an interesting thing happens when these guys go through a communication crisis. All of these parts of their personality that we've talked about here actually get ramped up and get even stronger. So they become more talkative. They become almost chaotic. They'll speak at 1,000 words a minute and really want people to listen to them. But the problem is, in a crisis, these behaviours actually want you to switch off and walk away from them, which is one of their biggest fears. The sorts of things that wound a playful communicator are unfriendly environments. They're social ridicule, being made fun of in front of people. Things that affect their recognition. So if they've put in an effort for something and they're not noticed, or if they know for a fact that...
To continue enjoying this presentation, download Bryn, the world's first business advisor in your pocket. To find out more, visit bryn.ai or search the App Store today.